According to a new report by the Senate's Joint Economic Committee, deaths from alcohol are now at their highest level since prohibition became law a century ago. Suicides have risen dramatically as well. Taken together, suicides, drug ODs, and alcohol deaths have been dubbed deaths of despair, for obvious reasons. If the numbers tell us anything, it's that America has more despair than at any time in the last century. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri is paying attention to this, despite the fact almost nobody else is. We talked to him recently. What do these numbers tell us, do you think?
They tell us that we have a crisis on our hands, Tucker. It's a crisis of hope in many places, like in my state of Missouri. I just spent a number of days traveling across the state, talking to some of the most economically distressed, or visiting some of the most economically distressed areas. And I can tell you, every single person who I talked about the meth epidemic that is overwhelming the state, talked about suicide. I remember meeting one guy in a coffee shop who was wearing a wristband that said, "Talk to me." And I said, "What's that for?" And he said, in their little town, they had multiple teen suicides just in the last year. It's everywhere. It's a crisis.
I mean, I think you could count alcohol, cirrhosis deaths, drug ODs, in some cases diabetes, type 2 diabetes. But they're all forms of suicide. They're deaths of despair, as we said in the intro. Why is almost nobody in Washington mentioning this? I can't remember this being brought up in the Democratic debates, for example. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, what the Democrats are talking about is banning plastic straws and banning cows, open borders. Part of it is, Tucker, is that the elite consensus that drives Washington has driven the establishment on both sides, has helped cause this problem. I mean, things like immigration that has kept wages down for too long in this country. Things like free trade, supposedly, that's actually been unfair trade that sent jobs overseas away from these communities that are struggling. And then, of course, the drugs. I mean, the drugs are pouring across the southern border. That's where almost all the meth in this country is made. It's made in Mexico. It comes across the southern border, but neither establishment has wanted to do anything about it. And that's one of the reasons we have the crisis that we do.
It's hard to imagine this happening to any group outside of rural America and it being ignored. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy nut, and I'm not alleging a conspiracy, but it just seems obvious. If the life expectancy of Syrian refugees were in steep decline, there would be a page one New York Times editorial about it.
Yeah, these are people who often they don't have a voice. I mean, they get overlooked by the self-appointed mainstream media, as you say. And by the way, I mean, yes, it's rural America, but it's black, it's white. I mean, it's working people who are working hard every day, trying to make ends meet, trying to make it for their families, can't afford their health care, can't get treatment, can't get a good job. And again, what's the media focused on? Whether cows contribute to climate change. I mean, this just shows you that we need a wake-up call in Washington, D.C. I mean, the D.C. establishment has totally failed. If this isn't proof, Tucker, of the total failure of the politics of the D.C. establishment, I don't know what would be.
When your people start dying by the hundreds of thousands and you don't notice, there's something, your democracy is not functioning correctly, I think. Yeah, bless you for bringing this up. I really appreciate it, Senator. Thank you. And thanks for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.